Uh, good morning, everybody. We will have a panel here about the different regulatory frameworks, knowledge and experience sharing. And the objective of this panel is discuss the aspects of the introduction of the new gas law in the Petrobras' main dominant position in the gas market. With the approval of the new gas law and its agreement with CAD, the Brazilian antitrust agents, to no longer to participate in the gas market and distribution, it opened up many opportunities for the new players. All this while the regulation itself is being created. And we want to know for our panelists how we may introduce competition in our market. And for beginning this discussion, we will receive Mr. Sebastian Larouste, CEO of Fluxys Brazil. And Sebastian, the floor is yours. Sebastian is the head of Fluxys. Sebastian is in charge of Fluxys Regional Office located in Rio de Janeiro. He manages the Fluxys participation in TBG and is also responsible for business and development of the Fluxys group in Latin America. Sebastian has more than 12 years experience in the energy and gas infrastructure sector. He has worked for Fluxys in both in pipeline and LNG business, holding various leadership positions in business development, M&A, and gas and infrastructure construction projects. Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elio. Good morning, everyone. I will start by sharing my presentation to all of you. Normally you should all see my screen. So dear Elio, Rogerio, William, it's really a pleasure to share this panel with you. I also would like to thank the organization of Rio Pipeline for the invitation in this panel, allowing me and Fluxys to share our regulatory experience from a European perspective. So today I will shortly present you who Fluxys is. Then I will share with you a summary of the main steps that led to the liberalization of the European gas market, which started in Europe 20 years ago. First, by explaining you the three main energy package directives that enabled the separation between infrastructure on one side and molecule suppliers, known as unbundling process. Then I'll show you how Europe uniformized the markets and removed the obstacles to support an optimal market functioning. And finally, I will finish my talk by illustrating this with two concrete examples from Belgium that could be relevant for Brazil. So first of all, who is Fluxys? Fluxys is an independent gas infrastructure group with more than 1,300 employees, and we are active in the midstream gas transmission sector as a TSO, exactly like TBG, NTS, or TAG are here in Brazil. We also operate a large aquifer gas storage facility in Belgium, and we have a long-lasting LNG experience from developing, building, and operating a 9 BCM Zeebrugge LNG terminal in Belgium since 1987, and also starting more recently the operations of the 12 BCM Dunkerque LNG regasification terminal in France. Today, we are actually a major European actor, and we are present in 10 European countries as fully independent gas TSO and LNG operator. We also contribute a lot with the other European TSOs and have the opportunity to increase our know-how since we also share shareholding with some key other European TSOs in some of the European assets we own. Then, as you probably know, since April this year, we acquired a 29% stake in TBG, one of the three main TSOs here in Brazil. We are very proud with this new partnership since TBG share a common DNA with us, since we both are operators, and therefore we have an excellent mutual understanding, allowing to exchange on best practices and support each other on various TSO matters. Now, I would like to start by remembering that it took 2 decades to make the European market evolve from an unbundling idea or concept towards an entire and complete unbundling model. This was actually initiated in 1998 with the first energy package, which aims at starting the separation between the commodity or the molecules and the infrastructure. Then, in 2003, the second energy package enabled a legal separation by proposing a clear framework, which was then confirmed and implemented in 2009 with the third energy package. As of today, actually, you can see on the map that the implementation of those unbundling requirements are completed and result mainly in 2 models which are being followed. You have on one side the ownership unbundling or OU model, and on the other side, the independent transport operator or the ITO system. The ownership unbundling model is the model which is today mostly used and followed in Europe, and many countries have evolved toward this in the last years. For example, in Belgium, Fluxys Belgium is OU since its recognition in 2012 by the national regulator. Then, the reason that Europe introduced the ITO model is that in some countries, the ownership unbundling rules could not be met because the controlling shareholders were still involved both on the infrastructure and molecule side. Therefore, the legal structure of ITO enabled to guarantee a clear separation in terms of governance between the TSO and its owner, in case the owner would still be involved in the production or in the sale of the molecules. The positive point about all this is that both in the case of OU and ITO, this ensures that markets stay competitive and open, while at the same time offering a non-discriminatory third-party access for the market participants. Then, at the time that the third energy package was validated and under implementation by the respective member states of Europe, another crucial pillar of the envisaged gas market model was to ensure an harmonization of the rules between all these European countries, while at the same time helping to reduce obstacles between the different markets. As you can see here on this slide, the key for Europe was to enable good interconnections between all the different countries and their respective market hubs. A hub being the physical or virtual place where the gas is traded. And Europe, when doing this, had 2 main objectives in mind. On one side, to guarantee the competition to enable a long-term efficiency for the end consumer, guaranteeing the best prices for him, and at the same time, to ensure a security of supply for Europe, leveraging on the various sources of gas and the necessary interconnections between all the different market zones and countries. And all of this was actually enabled thanks to a tool which was important, which was the development of 5 network codes that were developed in the last decade. Which brings us to actually to this slide to show you an overview of the implementation of these 5 network codes. Development which occurred basically in the period from 2009 until 2019. First, you can see here that the congestion management rules which were aimed at reducing congestion between interconnection points and facilitating the market liquidity. Then Europe also in parallel adopted another key network code with the definition of the capacity allocation mechanism, which aimed at defining the rules to allocate in a non-discriminatory way these capacities to the market participants, known as the shippers, as you probably know, and ensure a uniformization throughout Europe to ensure the same rules were followed from both sides of the borders or between the different TSOs. Moreover, this capacity allocation mechanism code was amended with full implementation by early 2018 in view of uniformizing the development of capacity expansion projects, so basically to better interconnect Europe. Then Europe also set out gas balancing rules, including the responsibilities of transmission system operators and the users, process which was finalized in October 2015. In parallel of that, the fourth pillar of the network codes development concerned the interoperability and data exchange rules to coordinate among the different, all the procedures between the network operators within the EU, and also the possibility to coordinate between Europe and the neighboring countries of Europe. And then finally, the last, let's say, step of the last piece of the puzzle was ensuring an harmonization of the transmission tariff structure for the gas to support tariff transparency and coherency, which was done by harmonizing the basic principles and definitions in terms of tariff calculation. So in summary, I would like to emphasize that the process that occurred took time, actually almost 10 years. It required coordination and involvement of all member states and their concerned regulators and TSOs. The positive of all this is that ACER, the European Agency of Energy Regulators, recognized and identified a positive effect on the market functioning, which is clearly visible today, even if you can still observe differences in the pace of adoption in the different European countries. So then my last contribution today to you is to illustrate to you these two specific examples I spoke to you at the beginning of my presentation to show of example of market liberalization that we realized with Fluxys Belgium as TSO of the Belgian network. First, I think it's interesting to show that we supported the opening of the market by being the first in continental Europe back in 1999 to create a physical gas hub, which was then reinforced with the creation of a virtual hub called ZTP, and which is today the reference within Belgium. What I want to highlight here is again that the process did not happen over one day, since we started with one shipper and then gradually increased to reach today a marketplace with 80 traders present, something we achieved, but over a period of 20 years. And then the second and last case I want to share with you today is what are the main takeaways of another important step in the context of market liberalization, which was the market merger that we realized in 2015 between Belgium and Luxembourg. And here we would suggest four main things when people are thinking of making a market merger. First, you should pay attention to the choice of the market merging model that you would select. You could opt for a trading region or an integrating balancing zone. The difference is basically either each TSO keeps its own balancing zone, but the gas will be traded in one hub, one place, or you put all the balancing zone together and you also sell the gas in one hub. So that is very important to first start with that one. If you opt for the integrating balancing zone, it is important that when you will merge these two market zones, is that you have a common balancing zone for which you need to consider also the legal aspects. For example, in Belgium and Luxembourg, both gas flows needed to be adapted to enable the merger. Thirdly, it's also important to ensure that the common decisional process will be done between the market actors and specifically also with the TSOs involved and the regulator. And then finally, important for the concerned TSO, which will internalize the capacities from these interconnection points that will disappear because of the merger. And it means that the TSOs will have to integrate this complexity and manage at operational level by them all the different configuration that would need to be considered. And of course, paying special attention to the right balance between costs and benefits. To conclude here, I think that Brazil is at an important crossroad in the gas market. And it's not a time to leverage on the recent adoption of the new gas law and positive momentum from the ongoing unbundling process, also supported by ANP, the ministries, the TSOs, ATGAIS, and the market participants. About the European perspective that I shared with you today, we, at Fluxys, do not see this as a kind of universal roadbook or rulebook, but rather as an experience to keep in the back of the head and use adequately where and when it could suit the Brazilian market and context. Finally, we are very looking forward to contribute to the energy developments in Brazil, and I'm curious to hear the insight from Rogério Manso from ATGAIS and what he will share us in a minute. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And now I will present Rogério Manso. He is executive president of ATGAS, is the Association of Operators of Transport Infrastructure. And Rogério Manso is a civil engineering with graduate degrees in oil marketing and logistics and business administration. He has over 35 years experience as an executive in the oil, gas, and renewables industry. He is currently the executive president of ATGAS, the Brazil's Transmission System Operators Associations. Rogério, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helio. Good morning, good afternoon, my panel colleagues. Helio, Sebastian, Bill, glad to be here with you. Thank you, IDP and the Rio Pipeline Organization Committee for the invitation to be here presenting in this panel. I will try to put in perspective, obviously, with the glasses of the transmission companies, issues which we believe important on the regulation, its role and its importance in the development of what is called the new gas market in Brazil. I will start by, let me see if I can close this here. Having a bit of a problem here with the, okay. I will start by giving a bird's eye view, especially for those who are not familiar with the Brazilian transportation system. It essentially consists of 9,400 kilometers of pipelines connecting our different supply sources, like the crude oil and gas production bases, the LNG terminals, the onshore production. I basically try to simply depict them here along the system, which is here in this dark line. So we have here the LNG terminals marked by L, the Santos Basin, the Campos Basin, the T basically was depicting the onshore, which is obviously spread along the system here in Manaus and so on. So the system is and the interconnections here with Bolivia and Argentina, okay? The system is over 90% integrated, as you can see. We have a small line which goes to Cuiabá, which is independent of the Brazilian system, but it's interconnected with Gasbol in Bolivia, and we have an independent system in the Amazon, the Urucu-Manaus system. Here's the half full. The second bullet essentially tells a bit about the half full, half empty glass. As we all know, the system with, let's say, around just under 6,000 miles of coverage is not on par with what we see in the United States or Europe, and even Argentina, who's a close neighbor. There's obviously a historic reason, let's say a weather reason. Also, there's very little space heating going on in Brazil. But The fact of the matter is that the current system basically supplies most of the Brazilian states, 17 out of 26, and it covers these states, which represents 90% of the Brazilian industrial GDP. So as we like to say, the gas went after the market. These are high volume, high pressure pipelines. It's a sustainable, safe, and efficient mode of transportation. And basically, the way it's designed by linking the different supply sources and all the system associated with it, the objective is to guarantee reliable supply for a broad and expanding market. As most of you might know, there's an expectation that over the next 10 years, the system will double the potential to supply gas, domestic gas, into Brazil, the upstream system I'm talking about. And we need to be prepared to transport all the gas that's made available for transportation on shore, both the domestic and the important gas. Now, how did this system come into existence? I'll just keep track of my time here. I try to represent here in a very liberal manner, cutting it down by decades, what I call the recent story of the transportation system, because it's really being developed over a long period of time. It's as young or old as the Brazilian oil industry, which really starts in the early 1900s. But as a system, really, that concept really started to build momentum as a project which took decades to be conceived and developed, which is the integration with Bolivia, basically started coming out of the drawing board. So in the 90s, we had this I call it a dream at that time, of bringing the participation of gas in the energy matrix from 2% to 10%. And we did that by building the Bolivia-Brazil gas pipeline, integrating Bolivia, the southeastern region, and the southern region, by displacing fuel oil used in industry and by using it on power generation too, all under the concept of regional integration. Now, that pipeline comes into operation in 2000, and 2000 is also the decade where we have the discoveries of the pre-salt. So now we have all this Bolivian gas looking for a home in Brazil, displacing fuel oil, supporting power generation, and now we have this new find, and we have to find new markets for it. And the way that the transportation system adapted to all that massive quantity of gas to come was by integrating the regions, the Southeast with the Northeast, the so-called Gazini, and by reinforcing the local networks, both the Southeast and the Northeast networks, so that all that flow that was about to come, which is now becoming a reality, it is a reality now, could be handled. So we integrate the system, and now we have what I just showed you before. We have an integrated system. We have the 9,400 kilometers of pipeline interconnecting these states. Now, so come 2010, so the third decade of this period, this recent history, let's say, and we don't have the gas. We have enough gas to supply the system, but the consumers now are saying, well, there's a lot going on all over the world. Our competitors are getting access to shale gas, to other alternatives, LNG coming from multiple sources, and competitivity is an issue now. If you look at the numbers, the market didn't grow enough even to absorb the volumes which are able to be transported in the system. So something has to be done, and there's the programs designed to find the solution. The solution is kind of obvious by looking at what's happening in other countries, which is essentially opening the market. So opening the market basically pulls regulation to the front seat, to the driver's seat. And you can see there are lots of issues here, a lot of instruments, which I'll show later. So there's market opening, there's unbundling, there's a new entry-exit system to basically help work out or make it easier for transactions to happen. Tax is a big issue in the national network, so there are tax adjustments. But so come now 2020. Okay, so what are we looking at now? A lot has happened. What's bound to happen now? Gas competition, routes. We have now 3 routes. The third route is coming on stream early next year, from the offshore to the onshore bringing gas. There are plans to have 1, 2, or 3 at least additional routes, which will basically push the transportation system into delivering that and creating also liquidity. But essentially, transportation now has a new role. It is still to connect the supply sources and bring them to the markets, but it's now seen as the platform. Once having the supply sources connected creates the ability for you to choose from different opportunities. I have not mentioned here before that when we integrated the system in the early 2000s, we started this concept of the floating LNG. We created the opportunity to arbitrage gas. So this is now bound to become more and more common. And we are now working on the concept for the new step in development of the system, which we call the pre-salt corridor, which is essentially debottlenecking the system, reinforcing the system, and expanding it to assure that the transportation system will have the ability to basically deal with these new routes of offshore gas, with imported gas, with the new source connections of existing LNG terminals, like, for example, Sergipe, like Rio de Janeiro, like the planned one in Santa Catarina, and obviously a few more to come. I will skim quickly through this. I don't want to run out of time, and I see it's kind of passing fast, but just to say that to see how important the regulation was in creating the market, we can see on the right side the different consequences, but supported by different instruments. It's like 8 months, at every 8 months, you have a new piece of high-level regulation. I'm not putting here ANP regulations, which happen on a more continuous basis, but just to see new gas law, decrees, National Council on Energy Policy rules. These are all supporting. So regulation is essential. I mean, it is a regulated market. It is a transition period, so regulation is key. What do we want to do at the end of the day with the natural gas transportation system? It's understood that it will become a pool whereby connecting different sources, domestic production, LNG, imported gas from Bolivia, Argentina, just for the sake of example, and also giving access to the different clients, the different consumers to this system, you have the ability to choose, to pick and choose. Where do I want to buy my gas from? Do I want to buy it from LNG? Do I want to buy it from Bolivia? So as long as you're integrated in the system, you have that ability. And why is this a pathway to competitive prices? Because I used here an example. These 3 curves represent different Petrobras pricings. You can see they follow essentially a curve with a logic, which is the function of which is the linkage to fuel oil prices. While in green, we put LNG prices. And we can see that if you have an obvious ability to choose between your sources, there is a tendency for the customer to be able to choose the cheaper price. And then you can see the result of this just by noticing that just after the new gas law was approved, Petrobras offered the market an alternative pricing linked to natural gas. So regulation was important and will continue to be important going forward. I won't go into the details here. There will be other presentations which will talk about this, but it's just to mention that there's a long way ahead. How are we working as transportation companies on this? First, let me talk quickly about our permanent objectives. So obviously, these are companies where ESG, environment, social, and governance criteria are very top on the agenda. We work on a sound regulation because regulation is in the essence of the industry. We look at the network expansion because it is in the blood. It is in the heart of the interests of the companies which are investing in this sector, and it is associated with what I said is a doubling of the gas production coming on, and obviously it's an asset-based industry, so technological development is key. Okay, Gather, I got about another minute. Key points where we're working. Conceptual model is important. We try to be present and to basically be a voice alerting the importance of keeping adherence to a conceptual model. I mean, we can see from time to time people who just forget what the main objectives were, and it's important to bring that on track. This is an industry, as I tried to show, which works in periods of decades. So the adherence to a specific model is important. The regulatory agenda, which is put out by ANP, essentially guarantees that there is cadence, that there is let's say, a known pathway and an alignment between the different agents. We're working very aggressively on the network codes. We have already submitted a first draft for consideration of ANP on one of the codes. We're working on two other codes which should be ready. The first draft to be submitted to the industry, especially the carriers, sometime early next year. We're working on harmonizing contracts to make basically life easier for our customer. Unified platforms, I'll talk about in a minute. A coordinated development plan, which is already embedded in the law. It's a 10-year plan looking forward on how the system will debottleneck and expand. And obviously, gas power integration. Gas is the main anchor of the industry today in Brazil, as important as the industrial system. And I will talk about this in a moment. Asset management, there are lots of regulatory issues here. Great focus on integrity, quality, and custody. We now have several customers. It's not the carrier who owns the system. So attention to that custody has double importance today. Network security and coordinated procurement. I will talk very quickly on this. You'll probably hear more from other colleagues throughout the event, but just to make life easier for the carriers, we have developed this capacity portal which works online. You can go and click and buy your transportation capacity product. It started with TBG. It's now a unified marketplace with TBG, NTS, and TAG, trying essentially to make it easier. There are multiple offers now. This is an example of what TBG is offering in terms of capacity products, daily, interruptible, monthly, quarterly. You can buy yearly contracts from year 1 to year +5. And this is what you're seeing here on TBG is what you will see coming on for all carriers. As of early next year, they've already started their process to commit capacity. All of them, TBG, TAG, NTS. Next year, in the early first quarter, TSB will also offer capacity. So by next year, all the four interconnected TSOs will be offering capacity in different modes. Also, not only for immediate shipment, but also for expansion of capacity, debottlenecking, and new connections. I will finish in a moment, but just to say, I mentioned very quickly the importance of gas and power integration. This is what we expect to create on the different proposals we're putting. Electricity power is also heavily regulated, so there are opportunities to harmonize those regulations, creating a virtuous cycle. Just for the sake of quick understanding, if we connect 3 gigawatts of power to the grid, basically the roll-in of that tariff allows that the whole system will pay 10% less tariff. So you can see how important that is. To end, I went with this one saying, yes, the new gas market is important. It's more than important, it's crucial, but there's a lot beyond the new gas market. What the transportation system and what gas means to Brazil has a lot more to do than the new gas market. The new gas market is an essential part and where the attention is, but we are working also on best practices, integrated emergency response, consolidated indicators so we can have industry-wide views of performance and objectives, emission reduction, biomethane transportation, hydrogen transportation, a Brazilian pipeline integrity database, and obviously cybersecurity. So thank you very much for the attention. And my email is under here. Any questions which I might not have the time to answer on the Q&A session, please direct them to my email. Thank you. Tá fechado, Hélio.
Yeah, Helio, you're on mute.
Thank you. Now we will listen to William Bird. He is president of RCP Engineering, and that is an engineering consulting company. Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Helio, and thank you, Sebastian and Rogerio, for your presentations. I perhaps will be able to make up a little time for us. My presentation is relatively short. I wanted to just give a very high-level overview of how regulations for energy pipelines work in the United States. And for sake of comparison, when you look at the numbers that Rogerio just presented to us for mileage of gas transmission pipeline in Brazil, and compare that to the United States, the US has 50 times, that's 50 times more mileage of gas transmission than Brazil does currently. And in many years, we'll build more pipe than Brazil has in the entire country in a single year. So the scale is much, much larger in the United States currently, but that's not to say that Brazil doesn't have the potential to grow to the scale of the United States from a gas transmission standpoint. So in the United States, to deal with that scale, we have a variety of regulatory agencies that are involved in the regulation of pipelines. So when we go to the next slide here. Okay, so I break the idea of regulating energy pipelines in the three broad areas. So there's the safety side of things, which is what my company really specializes in. So the pipeline integrity issues, how do you avoid accidents and spills and injuries, fatalities, things like that. But there's also a totally different area of regulation on the siting and location of brand new pipeline systems. So as your pipeline systems grow and develop, you're going to run into all kinds of conflicts and trade-offs that had to be made about where do the pipes go. And then lastly, what we've heard mostly this morning is on the financial side of things and on the market regulation. So how do you make sure that the players can get a fair price for their transportation services and for their products that they're offering, and everybody has a fair access. So with the United States, as in Brazil, you've got the federal government and you've got state governments. So for us, we've got one large federal government and then 50 state governments. And you will see a variety of approaches to how each of these three things are regulated at the state level and at the federal level. So there's a good bit of overlap, and then there's a good bit of differentiation. Some pipelines are regulated only at the state level. Some pipelines are regulated only at the federal level. So it can get very complicated, and I'm not trying to explain how that works, but just to say that there is a role for the state governments and the federal governments in all three of these areas. So let's start with the safety regulation side of things. So there we think about the industry codes, the ASME codes. In the United States, you would use ASME codes, API codes, NACE codes, all these professional societies that have technical standards that deal with corrosion control and the quality of pipe materials you use, welding standards and procedures, all kinds of things like that. So, and when you look at the history of the pipeline safety regulations in the United States, they actually started with the industry codes that existed at the time. And those were simply adopted into the federal regulations. And then they continue to evolve from that point. So as these rules evolve and they get new rules, and then we get new rules every year, or modifications to the existing rules, the federal agency has to meet a benefits cost criteria when they issue a new rule. So they have to show that, yes, the overall benefits to society are higher than the cost to the people that I'm imposing this rule on. So usually pipeline operators are going to have to spend money to comply with a rule. And the agency has to show that, well, this is a good deal from an economic standpoint. Of course, there's a lot of gray area in how you do the math, right? How you calculate that. But still, they have to go through the process of saying, yes, it meets benefits cost criteria. And then the agency is at the state and federal level are tasked with enforcing those regulations. So usually we're talking about monetary penalties. Sometimes they will impose operating conditions on a pipeline or operating limitations. So you have to reduce your pressure to a certain amount, or you have to shut down until certain corrective actions are taken, things like that. There is a possibility of criminal sanctions. So if people knowingly and willfully violate the pipeline safety regulations, they may actually face jail time. It's very rare in the United States that would happen, but it is a possibility within the legal framework. And I think it's important that I believe for the most part in the United States, there is regulatory certainty. So operators can know that they are doing what the rule requires them to do, and they're probably not going to be fined or sanctioned, as long as they're, making a good faith effort to do the right thing. Now, once a rule's in place, so I mentioned the cost benefit requirements for new regulations, but once a regulation's in place, then compliance is required regardless of cost. So it doesn't really matter if you have to spend millions of dollars to comply with a certain regulation. The rule basically says you have to do it. And there are opportunities to get waivers. Usually, if it's an economic driver, you have to show that the pipeline simply wouldn't be economic if you had to do that, and you need to do something else. But still, even if you do something else, you have to show that it's an equivalent level of safety. So you're not trading off safety just to save money. Now, the second area of regulation I talked about was the location and siting. And that's really for large new projects, significant projects. So if you're building a cross-country transmission pipeline system, then there's a process you have to go through, either at the federal level or at the state level, to decide where the pipeline goes. And in general, in the United States, there's really no prohibition on where it goes. There's no rule that says you cannot put a pipeline in the river, or you can't put a pipeline near a school or near a hospital. Think of all the different highly populated areas you might have. So there's no prohibition against doing that, but there definitely are trade-offs. Do you want to go through the existing transmission corridor and further impact the people that are already impacted by that transmission corridor, or should you go somewhere else? Should you go out in a rural area or an agricultural area? So sometimes those alternative routes cost you more money. So there are lots of trade-offs that have to be made, and really, in my opinion, there are a lot of facts involved. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a political process. Somebody has to make a decision to say, this interest is going to be the overriding interest I consider in making this decision, and so frequently it's some type of a governmental entity that is got the final approval authority for the route of a major pipeline system. Public Utility Commission is what we would frequently refer to in the United States that would have those kinds of things, or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then lastly, the issue that we've heard mostly about this morning is the financial and economic side of things. And in the United States, you find that the distribution piping systems from a financial standpoint are frequently regulated differently than the transmission systems. So in the United States, while we have 300,000 miles more or less of gas transmission pipeline, we have well over 1 million miles of distribution pipeline, taking the gas to the end customers, the individual homes, the individual businesses, small commercial areas, things like that are distribution piping. And usually if you're a distribution customer, you're a captive customer of a monopoly. You don't have much choice as to who you buy your gas from or how you get it. So you'll have usually it's a state level agency that will regulate that from an economic standpoint. On the transmission side, you frequently have interstate transmission on all sides of the contracts. You have knowledgeable and wealthy commercial clients. So they all have their own legal representation. They can make their own choices. So there's a less, I would say, less prescriptive kind of regulation there, but still there's regulations that deal with the gas transmission pipelines too. And one issue that frequently comes up when we're talking about rate regulation is this: what goes in the rate base? Is this expenditure something that the company has to pay for as part of their normal operating expenses, or is it something that they get to add to their rate base and then recover the cost of that capital over a period of years? So all three of these areas, you're going to need regulators that have a lot of specific expertise in that area. And in the United States, we frequently run into issues where the industry and the regulatory agency are both competing for the same talent. You both want that person with the financial expertise, or you both want that person with the engineering expertise. And you frequently see people moving from one side to the other, the regulatory agency into industry, or industry into the regulatory agency. But you've got to make sure your regulatory agencies are competitive with industry, with the salaries, benefits, working conditions that they have versus their industry counterparts. And I'll list some of the specific types of expertise that people need. On the safety side, you're really leaning heavily on the engineers and metallurgical engineers and corrosion engineers, people like that. And a lot of times regulatory agencies wouldn't have that kind of expertise on staff if you didn't go out and recruit it. So on the financial side, obviously you need people to understand economics and financing and accounting and business management in general. Then the siting side of it is, in my opinion, probably the thing that the regulatory agencies are probably most naturally adept at, dealing with the political process of getting input from lots of different parties and then making some final decisions as to what the ultimate route of the pipeline will be. So my recommendations, to keep it short, make sure your regulatory agencies can get and retain experienced technical personnel for the safety and financial regulatory side of the business. And then I would say place your siting decisions with some kind of political body. And in Brazil, you will have your own way of doing that, but have some opportunity for all the different parties who are affected by a pipeline system to have input into the final decision. But I would strongly recommend put deadlines on the decision-making process, because otherwise it can drag out forever and lead to more regulatory uncertainty. You want your pipeline operators to know that when they propose a project, they have some kind of finite window that they're looking at to get it approved and then eventually build it. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, for your presentation. And now I will ask some questions for you, because we don't have any questions from the audience. And I will beginning with Sebastian. Sebastian, you have lots of challenges in our regulatory agenda, but we have a special point that is the hub creation, as you mentioned. And may you talk us about this subject, the challenge of the hub creation, trade hub creation?
Yes, Emilio, thank you. I think, as you know even better than me, in Brazil, you had the beginning of this discussion, and so I think from the experience we have from Belgium and Europe, creating a hub requires time also and a good preparation, and then an excellent coordination between the different actors, so the TSOs, but supported by the regulators and by the market participants. And as I think Rogerio Manso put it on his presentation, I think one of the first steps of enabling this was the POC that was created and developed by TBG and then adopted by NTS, TAG, and TBG. And so my view would be continue building on that, and knowing that, of course, if you want to get inspiration from what we did in Europe about what worked and what maybe could be improved, I'm glad to share that in a more detailed discussion between us.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And I have a question for Rogerio also. Rogerio, we are seeing this at this time, many new source points on the gas source points on our coast, and probably we have some onshore production also, additional production also. And how you told us about this, how you think that's better form to connect these source points with the transmission network, please.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think we understand from our side the role we have to play by being this basically the meeting points of the different sources of supply. So for us, it's a top priority to basically link those points. Gustavo has said this morning, for example, he has talked about the effort that TAG is doing in making sure that, for example, Sergipe is interconnected quickly. They're taking decisions ahead of what a typical FID process would be to assure that they can meet deadlines. But I'd say it's like in the war, no man should be left behind. So if there is a source, and if they're not linked to the system, we will do every effort to make sure that there is a coherent proposition and that it's workable, it's implementable, and as both Sebastian and Bill have given the lead here, there has to be a timing. It's not like, well, we'll connect you someday. There has to be a specific agreement that it will be done in a reasonable timing, and that reasonable means, as the decree says, it has to be speedy, it has to be fast, it has to be a priority of regulation that the system moves quickly.
Thank you, Rogério. And we have a question from the audience. I suppose this question is for Bill. Bill, sorry.
Yes, I can see this. I can see the question. I think I understand what they're asking.
You can see the question.
Yes.
I suppose the question is how you're dealing with the change of class location along the time.
Right. So in the United States, well, in the industry codes to begin with, they have the concept of class location for gas pipelines. So class breaks into 4 scales. So you have class 1, 2, 3, or 4, class 4 being the densest population in an urban area, and class 1 being the least populated. And there's a multitude of requirements in the gas pipeline regulations that vary depending on class. A class 4 pipe has a much lower operating pressure than a class 1 pipe, all other things being equal. But that's only one of many, many examples. In the United States, class location is not grandfathered. So what we mean by that is if you build it in a class 1 area and then it becomes a class 3 area because population has grown around your pipeline, you have to comply with the class 3 requirements. Well, that is a big problem if your pipeline, say, isn't strong enough for that new class location. So historically, pipeline operators have had to actually replace the pipe to meet the new class requirements. The last several years, the federal pipeline agencies has been issuing waivers, or what they call special permits, that allow operators to do other things as opposed to replacing the pipe. And we are in the process of updating the regulations so that we have a more permanent process to do that. So that we know exactly what you need to do, and you don't have to apply for a special permit or a waiver.
I have another question for you, Bill.
Yes. Yeah. So talking about the problem of product theft, and it has been a significant problem in a number of countries. It hasn't really been much of a problem in the United States. And I think part of the reason for that is we have very strenuous right-of-way patrol requirements, and most operators will exceed those requirements. So people are on, a company representative is on the right-of-way looking at the pipeline right-of-way multiple times a year, sometimes multiple times a month. So it's much harder to do something on the right-of-way without it being noticed. And a large percentage of our pipeline systems, transmission pipeline systems, can be inline inspected. So when we run, I remember hearing stories when we first started running inline inspection tools in the United States, that a number of illegal taps were identified on pipelines that weren't supposed to be there. But that is, I think that problem has mostly gone away in the United States. But like I said, I know it's still a problem in other countries.
Thank you, Bill. I think that our time is finishing, and I want to thank the organization to invite me to make this panel, and thanks for all the panelists to these good presentations and it's very good debate that we may take forward in this section to develop the industry that we are in a new beginning. Thank you, everybody, and Thanks.
Thank you, Helio.